Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Downhill. And what Downhill is essentially about is basically we center on this family and they are staying in the Swiss Alps basically. They're just trying to get over this vacation, but they're also trying to, remain as a family because the father has grown kind of distant and this is him trying to, get back on good terms with the family and things like that. But basically one day while they are having lunch, this huge avalanche occurs. It really just comes out of nowhere and basically, after this, while in the midst of this avalanche, Will Ferrell's character, he ends up basically running away from the family. He's far too focused on his phone and things like that, and this really starts to cause a real disconnect with his wife. And so the rest of the film is him trying to do what he can to repair this relationship, but also accept what happened because he really does see things very differently, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Downhill overall, I will say, when the trailer for this movie first came out, I was very intrigued. I thought this is a really different kind of premise. This seems like there's a lot you can do with it, until I realized it was a remake of a foreign film that I've heard really good things about, and since then, I've been a little bit more hesitant about it. I think there was definitely potential in the film, but I made a point to check out the original foreign film, which I actually like a lot. The Force Majeure, I think, is a really, really great film. It does a very good job of telling the story of this family that has grown very distant, but also this character that is very cowardly and won't really accept it, and how his masculinity is getting in the way, and how this affects, his overall relationship, this one very insignificant thing. And so, there's a lot of things that film does right. Basically, my main thing going into this film is I was just really hoping this would be one of those remakes that was necessary, that they could bring something here that wasn't in the original film. I really like both Will Ferrell and Julia Louis-Dreyfuss. I think they're both very talented for sure, and I was fully hoping that this could be something really good. And what we get here is absolutely not the case. This is easily one of the most disposable and unnecessary remakes I think I've ever seen. This is a complete nothing movie. That's the best way to sum this. This is an absolute nothing movie, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, but we're just going to start off right now, starting off with the cast. And that is, I think, the best thing about this movie for sure. There's a lot of things that I don't like about this film, but in terms of the cast, for the most part, they actually are pretty good. Specifically, Julie Louis-Dreyfuss and Will Ferrell are both really strong here. You understand that these two already have a very difficult relationship. They're just very distant from each other. They're not as close as they used to be, and you definitely do feel that throughout the film. And they do a really good job at selling those performances, specifically Dreyfuss, who really gets to shine here. There's one scene with her where these two are having this really vicious argument, and I thought she did a really strong job. It really made me want to see more dramatic work from Julie Louis-Dreyfuss in the future for sure, and I do think the film does utilize these two pretty well, and they're really the one thing that keeps this film from being absolute garbage to me. If they weren't in this film, I probably would have hated this, to be honest with you, because they really do a good job at selling the distance between these two and just selling the differences that they have. They both have very different perspectives on things, and you can see how that is really making them clash, and I thought overall that was something that was very well demonstrated here. But the rest of the cast here just really leaves a lot to be desired. Miranda Otto is an actress that I usually really like, but I don't know what they're really trying to do with her here. They make her like this weird like sidekick that they run into every so often. She's very over the top and almost like a cartoon, and just I did not really feel fit in this movie very much at all. And again, I don't know if it's Miranda Otto's fault, because I do feel like she was really going for it, but I just felt like what she was doing was not at all something that this movie needed. Nothing felt like she had to be here, and I don't feel like she did a very strong job here at all. Zoe Chao and Zach Woods are fine. They are fine for what they have for sure, but again, they definitely could have been utilized better. And then the two kids that Julie Louis-Dreyfuss and Will Ferrell have are also fine in the movie. They didn't really feel like they were bad child actors, but I didn't really feel like they were all that well utilized, so that's really what I have to say about the rest of the cast here overall. But now we get to the directing and the writing, which this is really where we get to the things that bothered me. And look, I'll say this right now. A lot of my issues with this movie, I think, very much stem from the fact that I did see the original film. And I think for those that didn't, it might not bother them as much. But for me, someone who thinks that film is far superior in pretty much every way, and considering this film delivered a very little for me, I don't like to compare the two, but it's one of those things where I feel like I kind of have to, because the directing in this film is just really not good at all. Matt Faxon and Jim Rash are talented directors. I've seen them do stuff before where they do handle comedy quite well. The problem with this movie is that it feels the need to be a lot funnier than the original. They infuse this comedy in here, and I just didn't feel like it fit in this realistic setting. When you have characters like, say, Miranda Otto's character, who really feels like she's in an entirely different movie, it just feels a little bit too heightened. Force Majeure had some really dark comedy, but it remained very realistic. It remained very grounded. Downhill, that's not really the case. It's trying to be grounded, but it also is trying to add a lot of just ridiculous humor that really almost entirely completely fell flat for me. I did not really laugh much at all during this movie, and I don't think the directing was very well realized here. And then the dramatic moments as well, it didn't really feel as genuine as they should. It didn't really feel like the movie knew what it wanted to be, and I really do attribute that to the fact that Nat Faxon and Jim Rash just didn't really feel like they had a very good vision here. And I always say this, like, you can adapt something and remake something when you feel you have something that can bring something new to the table, something that can change the story and make it better, something that can add something that wasn't there before. Nothing about this directing said that to me. Nothing about this directing feels like these two had this idea of what they wanted this to be. It felt like they just did it because why not? It felt like they watched Force Majeure on, like, TV, and they're like, alright, let's do a remake of that, for no reason, really. And that really does bring this film down significantly for me. The writing, though, is easily my biggest issue, though, because in terms of what this film is trying to do, I really have a hard time trying to figure it out. The original film has so much to say about relationships and how much one sort of, one mistake can really change the entire fabric of that relationship, can make them go down this really dark path and things like that, and really separate these two from each other. It has a lot to say about toxic masculinity and things like that. It has a lot to say about a ton of things. And this film, on the other hand, I don't really understand what they're trying to say, and my biggest issue, without a doubt, is just how little this film delivers in terms of the story. We know so little about these characters. We don't really know a lot about their situation. And if you were to watch this film and not watch the original, I think you'd have a really hard time trying to understand, like, what they're going for here. You get the sense that these two are distant, for sure, but you don't really understand why. Will Ferrell's just, like, on his phone a lot, and he's not really that into what's going on. But then, towards the middle portion of this film, you can tell he is trying to make more of an effort. He is trying to connect more with the family, but Dreyfuss just always wants them to stay in the house and things like that. And it's just, the writing is very inconsistent when it comes to this film. And the one thing that I think they were trying to do, which I did notice at first, is what they were trying to do with Julia Louis-Dreyfuss' character. They're clearly trying to make her more of the focus, whereas Force Majeure, the character of Tomas is very much the main character in that movie. Whereas here, it very much seemed like they were trying to focus more on her. The problem is, they don't really do much of anything with her. We get the sense that she wants to be a little bit more liberated. She wants to be a little bit more free and things like that, but there isn't really a clearly defined character arc. There's one thing they add with her that maybe is going to go somewhere, goes absolutely nowhere. There's really no reason to add this in at all, and it really just made me question, like, what was the point of adding this specific plot point in? Because there's a thing they do with her that I really did not like at all, but I was open to see where they were going to take it, and where they take it is absolutely nowhere. They don't do anything interesting with that very much at all. And then Will Ferrell's character, it just comes across as someone that is just kind of stupid. He doesn't come across as someone that is, very much a douchebag like he is in the original film. The original film, you can tell this guy's kind of an asshole. He doesn't really want to own up to anything that he's done, whereas Will Ferrell here just comes off as kind of dumb and not really someone that, is understanding what the real problem is here. And I think the other biggest problem is that this conflict itself is not really brought to the forefront in the way that it should. It takes a long time for this to even become much of an issue. It's very much in the background, and when it's brought up, it's not brought up in the way that it should. In Force Majeure, there's so much more time to fully explore what's going on here. There's way more time to understand the gravity of this situation, well, because this family was in an avalanche, but the film just really does not do a very good job with that very much at all. And then the characters here, besides those two, almost every other character in this movie feels entirely unnecessary. I already touched upon how Miranda Otto's character just does not fit in this movie at all, with this very, stereotypical Swedish accent that she's doing. And again, I'm not saying that this character could not have worked. In fact, in the original film, the character that Julie Louis-Dreyfuss is playing, the version of her in the original film does have a friend that is kind of odd, but not to this heightened sense. It's just, the joke in the original film is that these two are, very, very Swedish. They speak Sweden. They don't speak English all that well. And that's a really good joke. There's a lot you can say about, the language barrier in there, and that makes for some really relatable humor, because we've all been in that situation before where there's someone that is of a different, descent, and we're not able to communicate with them as well because we don't understand their language and the way they carry themselves and things like that. And I think that's a really funny joke. But what they do with Miranda Otto in this movie is just way too over the top for what they're going for here. And there's many moments like that. There's many moments where it felt like it needed to be a dumb Will Ferrell comedy. And I don't think that worked here very much at all. I think this movie should have had a much better blend than that, and I attribute it to the fact of the actors that are in this movie, but also that the directors of this film are very much comedians, and it didn't really feel like they knew how to go for that more dramatic material that the film really was trying to sell. It just didn't really feel like the film was as nicely blended as it could have been. I think the original handles that far better, and that really did bring a lot of this film down for me. But then the characters of Zoe Chao and Zach Woods, I honestly felt did not really need to be here. It felt like they were only here because in the original film, they had friends that, tried to help them with this situation, whereas these characters aren't very well defined at all. And in the original film, this relationship is kind of contrasted with the main one. We get to see how similar but also how different they are in that way. And this film doesn't really do much of anything there. We get the sense that this is just a very free-spirited couple that doesn't really have a lot of worries in their lives, and I just didn't find them to be very interesting characters, and I also just did not feel they were utilized all that well at all. And the same goes for the two kids here. Really just felt like they didn't have to be in this movie. There's one scene where there is a conflict going on, and that does directly affect what's happening and why a certain event takes place. But it just kind of felt like there were kids in this movie because there were kids in the original. In the original film, we really get into the effect that this, avalanche had on these kids, how it's made them very closed off, but also how they are terrified that this is putting a strain on their parents' relationship. Here, there's nothing like that. The most we get from these two kids is that they have this obsession with technology. They don't want to do anything involving skiing. They don't want to do anything involving, they don't actually want to do anything on this trip, and it doesn't feel like it's because of this avalanche. It doesn't feel like that's what's happened. It felt like they were like that from the beginning of the movie, and there just isn't really anything that they really do with them, and especially towards the end of this film, this whole thing just felt entirely unnecessary. There isn't a point in this movie where it feels like, okay, I see what they're trying to do here. Okay, I see, how they're trying to, kind of play around with that. They don't do anything like that, and it just makes for a really, really annoying experience overall that really was very disappointing for me, for sure. And again, in terms of this conflict, there's really, I would say, only one scene that really explores the gravity of this situation, because again, This is a couple whose relationship is very much starting to fade out. They're at a point where they already weren't on the best of terms, and you can tell how this very much did separate them in that way. And there's one scene that you think it's really going to go somewhere, and it really doesn't go much of anywhere, and I don't think they do a good job with that. The cinematography, though, is really good here, except, again, they don't really do a very good job of doing what the original did, where they really held in on certain shots. A lot of this film doesn't want to do that. It feels like you're going to get bored. It feels like, you know, we're not interested in that. But that's one of the best parts of the original film, is just the landscapes of it all. And here, while there is a lot of great landscapes, and you can tell they are at these, you know, this beautiful, they are in this beautiful location, it doesn't stick out in the way it does in the original, and that did bring it down for me. The score I found incredibly cheesy here. It just didn't really work very much at all. It felt like they were trying to recapture like the Vivaldi score that looms throughout all of the original film, and it just did not work here for me. I did not like the score here very much, but easily my biggest issue with this movie is its editing. When it comes to what this film is trying to do story-wise, you look at the original Force Majeure, and you see how well fleshed out all these characters are, how much time, how much time we're given to really explore everything. And so the choice to make this film only an hour and 20 minutes long, and even shorter than that without credits, is baffling to me. And it's easily the thing that brings down this whole film. I was so shocked with how much we were just zooming through everything, how quickly things were happening here. It really felt like they didn't want to take any time to explore anything anything more than a surface level. Everything that's explored here is incredibly surface level, and nothing feels like it is in the authentic way that the original was. There's so much time given in that film to understand these characters. There's nothing like that here. In fact, it feels like they zoom through every key event that's supposed to go down. I was so shocked when we were already at the ending of this film. And look, I walked in knowing it was going to be short, but I just assumed that they were trimming enough here to where they were able to make the story work. But to be honest, I have no idea why this film is as short as it is, and it really feels like it was completely bastardized in that way. And the way this movie ends is truly horrific to me. If you know the ending of the original film, the way the film ends in the original, it's very much left to interpretation. Here, it felt like they thought we were stupid. Like, they needed to spell out every single thing that's happening, and it really pissed me off. I audibly groaned in the theater, and I don't know if other people were like as annoyed by it, because again, I feel like a lot of people are going to walk into this movie not knowing that it's an adaptation, and that's fine. But knowing what the original did and knowing what the final scene is supposed to mean here, what they ended up doing with it, I thought was completely disgraceful. And I was so pissed with the way they decided to end this movie, and also just end in such an abrupt manner. The actual final scene here, I was so shocked that that was the ending of the movie. It's one of the most abrupt endings of the entire year, and I could not believe how they decided to end this film. And like I said, considering how meaningful the original film was, there was so much I took away from that film. It's one of those endings where it just leaves you with a lot of questions, but in a way where, you want to know more. You really want to unpack what went down. When this film ends, you just kind of sit there and you feel absolutely nothing. You feel completely cheated because it didn't feel like this film had any idea of what it was trying to say. What is the central message here? I really have no idea, and I absolutely attribute it to the incredibly short runtime and the fact that they just did not take the time to dive into anything here, making for a very, very surface level experience. So yeah, ultimately, Downhill is such a unnecessary film to me. I do think there was an opportunity here to do something different. There was an opportunity here to flesh out Julia Louis-Dreyfuss's character more, make her more the star of this movie. But because of the fact that they zoom through everything, they take very little time to really make you give a shit about anything that's going on. And also the fact that they just did not really understand the source material and really felt like they had to dumb it down for American audiences, and also this weird attempt to have a lot more humor in there that really almost entirely fell flat for me. I mean, a perfect example of this is the scene with Zach Woods and Will Ferrell in this movie. They do a similar scene in Force Majeure where there's this this girl comes up and starts like, you know, oogling them and things like that. But what they do in this movie, it just felt like they were trying to make it funnier. So like, oh, we'll laugh at it because we expect that in a Will Ferrell movie. And I just don't really think it worked at all. Downhill is one of those films where it has very talented performances in both Julie Louis-Dreyfuss and Will Ferrell, who, like I said, are definitely very strong here. But as a whole, this is a film where I legitimately have no idea why it was made. There really doesn't seem much of a point to it, very much at all. It's a film that I think absolutely should not have been made, and if you're going to watch this movie, very much stick to the original. And I really do attribute it to the fact that the original, there wasn't much that needed to be fixed. There maybe were a couple things that they could have fixed, but all the things that they could have, they didn't take any time to really do in this movie. And so what we have overall is one of the most unnecessary remakes that I have seen in a very long time, and I'm definitely going to give Downhill overall a C-. But over, guys, in my review of Downhill, let me know what you guys saw of this movie overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.